He worked the night shift, never spoke much, just pumped gas and took cash. Customers thought he was just another ordinary guy. Until that night, when two armed robbers walked in and saw the faded tattoo on his arm. Welcome to the Human Stories. Before we dive into this powerful tale of hidden strength and quiet heroism, tell us in the comments what city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this need to be heard, hit that subscribe button and help us make sure they're never forgotten. The Shell gas station sat at the edge of town, right where the interstate met the old highway. It was the kind of place that stayed open when everything else had closed, a beacon of fluorescent light, cutting through the darkness from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. Inside, behind the bulletproof glass and rows of energy drinks, sat the same man every night. Frank Miller. At least, that's what his name tag said. 58 years old, average height, with shoulders that seemed to carry more weight than they should. His uniform was always the same, a blue work shirt with the Shell logo, dark jeans that had seen better days, and black sneakers that never quite lost their shine. His hair was always combed, his face always clean-shaven, but there was something in his icy distance that spoke of places most people had never been. The locals who stopped by during his shift barely noticed him. To them, he was just part of the scenery, like the humming coolers and the persistent smell of motor oil. He'd look up when they entered, ask how much, in a voice that was neither friendly nor unfriendly, and go back to whatever he was doing behind the counter. Some thought he was rude, others figured he was just tired. None of them suspected the truth. Frank had been working this shift for 3 years, ever since he'd moved to this small town outside of Denver. Before that, nobody knew where he'd come from. He'd simply appeared one day, filled out an application in careful handwriting, and started showing up every night at exactly 10:45 p.m. The manager, a heavy-set man named Rodriguez, had been desperate enough for night shift workers that he'd hired Frank on the spot, no questions asked. Good thing too, Rodriguez would later tell his wife. Guy's reliable as clockwork, never calls in sick, never causes trouble, never complains about anything. What Rodriguez didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Frank's internal clock had been calibrated by 20 years of military precision, 20 years of waking up at 0400, of being exactly where he needed to be when he needed to be there, of understanding that other people's lives sometimes depended on his punctuality. Night began the same way. Frank would arrive 15 minutes early, not because he was paid for those 15 minutes, but because arriving early was ingrained in his DNA. He'd park his aging Toyota pickup in the employee spot behind the building, walk around to the front entrance, and tap on the glass. Carlos, the evening shift worker, would unlock the door with visible relief. Carlos was 23, working his way through community college, and the night shift made him nervous. "How'd it go?" Frank would ask. The same question every night. "Quiet," Carlos would usually answer, or "busy," or "some drunk guy gave me trouble around 9. Frank would nod, take note of anything important, and watch as Carlos counted out the register and gathered his things. "See you tomorrow," Carlos would say. "Drive safe," Frank would reply. Then Frank would be alone with the fluorescent lights, the security cameras, and the steady hum of machinery that kept the place running. He'd spend the first 30 minutes doing what Carlos called Frank's routine, checking the coffee makers, restocking the hot dog rollers, wiping down surfaces that were already clean, and making sure every product on every shelf was perfectly aligned. To an outside observer, it might have looked like obsessive-compulsive behavior. In reality, it was tactical preparation. Frank was creating order in his environment, establishing baselines, identifying anything that was out of place. Old habits from a life where noticing the wrong detail could mean the difference between coming home and being shipped home in a box. The real work began after midnight. That's when the interstate traffic picked up long-haul truckers running through the night, shift workers heading home from factories, and the occasional traveler who'd miscalculated their fuel needs. Frank handled them all with the same professional courtesy, but his eyes were always working, always assessing. He'd learned to read people in places where reading them wrong could get you killed. The way someone walked through the door, whether their hands were visible, how their eyes moved around the store, whether they seemed nervous, angry, or dangerous. Most of the time, his assessment was simply civilian, no threat. But sometimes, his internal alarm system would ping, and he'd pay closer attention. There had been incidents over the years, small ones, mostly, but they'd given Frank glimpses of what lay beneath his carefully maintained civilian facade. 6 months into the job, 2 college kids had come in around 2 a.m., clearly drunk and looking for trouble. They'd knocked over a display of motor oil and started laughing about it. When Frank had asked them to clean it up, one of them had gotten belligerent. "Make me, old man," the kid had said, stepping closer to the counter. Frank had stood up slowly, and something in his posture had changed. His shoulders had squared, his weight had shifted to the balls of his feet, and his hands had moved to positions that would allow for quick action if necessary. He hadn't said anything threatening. He'd simply looked at the kid with eyes that had seen too much to be intimidated by a drunk college student. The kid had backed down immediately, mumbling an apology as he and his friend had cleaned up the mess and hurried out of the store. Another time, a woman had rushed in just before Dawn, clearly frightened, she'd kept looking over her shoulder and jumping at every sound. "Is everything all right, ma'am?" Frank had asked. "I think someone's following me," she'd whispered. "A car's been behind me for the last 20 miles, and when I pulled in here it pulled in too. It's parked over by the truck stop." Frank had glanced at the security monitor, noting the position of the suspicious vehicle. "Go into the restroom and lock the door," he'd told her calmly. "I'll handle this." He'd stepped outside, walking casually toward the truck stop as if he were just checking on something. The suspicious car had started up immediately and driven away quickly. When Frank had returned, the woman had asked how he'd known what to do. "Just experience," he'd said. But it was more than that. It was training. It was the muscle memory of a man who'd spent 2 decades learning how to handle dangerous situations with minimal fuss and maximum effectiveness. The night everything changed started like any other. July 15th. Hot and humid even after midnight. Frank was restocking the coffee station when he noticed the security camera showing 2 men getting out of an old sedan in the parking lot. They'd sat in the car for several minutes before getting out, which was unusual. Most people came to gas stations with a purpose: fuel, snacks, or bathroom breaks. They didn't sit and plan. The 2 men approached the store separately, which was another red flag. The first one was tall and thin, wearing a hoodie despite the heat. The second was shorter and stockier, with nervous energy that was visible even on the grainy security footage. Frank moved back behind the counter, his hands automatically checking the positions of the panic button and the baseball bat Rodriguez kept hidden beneath the register. He didn't think he'd need either, but preparation was automatic. The tall one entered first. Keeping his hood up and his head down, he browsed the snack aisle without really looking at anything, picking up items and putting them back down. Classic. Pre-crime behavior, killing time while working up nerve. The short one came in 30 seconds later. He made a beeline for the counter, but his eyes were scanning the store, checking for cameras and exits. Another classic tell. Frank watched them both, his expression neutral but his mind calculating distances, obstacles, and potential weapons. The tall one was probably armed but inexperienced. His movements were too jerky, too obviously nervous. The short one was more controlled, which made him more dangerous. "Pack of cigarettes?" the short one said when he reached the counter. "What brand?" Frank asked. "Doesn't matter." Wrong answer. Cigarette smokers always had a preference. Frank turned to the cigarette display, using the reflection in the glass to keep both men in his peripheral vision. As he reached for a random peck, he saw the short one make a subtle hand signal to his partner. Game time. The tall one moved first, walking quickly to the front door and turning the lock. The click echoed through the store like a gunshot. At the same time, the short one pulled a revolver from his waistband, a .38 special, old but functional. "Open the register," he shouted, pointing the gun at Frank's chest. Frank's first reaction was to raise his hands, slowly and visibly. "Easy," he said, his voice calm. "I don't want any trouble. I said open the register." The gunman was sweating now, adrenaline making him shaky. Okay, Frank said, turning toward the cash register. But he was moving deliberately, buying time to assess the situation. The gunman was holding the weapon incorrectly, too tight, finger on the trigger instead of alongside it. Classic amateur mistake. The tall one had produced a Nifa cheap folding blade, probably from a gas station just like this one. Also an amateur. Frank had dealt with amateurs before. They were dangerous because they were unpredictable, but they were also vulnerable, because they didn't really know what they were doing. "Hurry up," the knife wielder shouted from his position by the door. Frank opened the register drawer, the bell dinging as it slid out. "There's about $300 here," he said. "That's all we keep in the register overnight." The gunman leaned forward to look at the money, and that's when his sleeve rode up slightly, revealing Frank's forearm and the tattoo that had been hidden there for 3 years. It wasn't much, just the edge of it visible beneath his shirt cuff, a trident piercing a skull, with the words SEAL Team 6 in faded blue ink. The kind of tattoo that told a story most people wouldn't understand, but the tall one by the door understood. He'd seen enough military movies to recognize the symbol, and his eyes went wide. "Dude," he said to his partner, "check out his arm." The gunman glanced down and saw the tattoo. For a moment, nobody moved. Frank could see the wheels turning in both men's heads, trying to process what they were seeing. "You're a SEAL?" the gunman asked, his voice cracking slightly. Frank met his eyes. For the first time since they'd entered the store, he dropped the act of being a frightened clerk, he said simply. "Bull," the tall one said from the door. "You're just some old guy working at a gas station." But the gunman was studying Frank more carefully now, and he was beginning to see things he'd missed before. The way Frank stood balanced, ready, the way his eyes tracked both of them simultaneously, the calm in his voice, despite having a gun, pointed at him. "What unit?" the gunman asked. Frank considered his options. He could lie, try to de-escalate, hope they'd take the money and leave. But something in the gunman's eyes told him that wasn't going to happen. These weren't seasoned criminals, they were desperate amateurs, which made them unpredictable and therefore more dangerous. "DEV GRU," Frank said quietly. 20 years. The gunman's face went pale. Even criminals knew what DevGru was: the Naval Special Warfare Development Group, the most elite SEAL unit. The ones who handled the missions that didn't officially exist. "You're lying," the tall one said, but there was doubt in his voice now. Frank shrugged. "Believe what you want, but you should know that I've been watching you since you got out of your car. I know your license plate number, I know you're both right-handed, and I know you've never done this before." The gunman's hand was shaking now. "Just give us the money." "I'll give you the money," Frank said, "but then you need to walk away, both of you. Get in your car and drive home." "Forget this happened." "Like hell," the tall one said. "He's seen our faces." That was the moment Frank knew this wasn't going to end with a simple robbery. The tall one started moving toward the counter, knife raised. It was a tactical mistake. He was too far away, telegraphing his movement, and he'd turned his attention away from the exits. Frank moved. 25 years of training kicked in, muscle memory from thousands of hours of practice taking over. He grabbed the cash register drawer and shoved it hard to his left, the heavy metal tray catching the gunman in the solar plexus and doubling him over. At the same time, Frank pivoted right, getting out of the line of fire as the gun discharged, the bullet shattering the cigarette display behind where his head had been a split second before. The tall one with the knife was still coming, but Frank was already inside his reach. A quick strike to the wrist sent the knife clattering across the floor. A follow-up elbow to the man's jaw dropped him like a stone. The gunman was trying to straighten up, trying to bring the weapon back to bear, but Frank was already there. A precise strike to the nerve cluster in the man's forearm caused his hand to go numb, and the gun fell to the floor. Frank kicked it away and spun the man around, applying a blood choke that would render him unconscious in seconds. "Don't move," Frank said to the tall one, who was groaning on the floor, blood trickling from his split lip. "Don't speak. Don't even breathe loud." The entire encounter had lasted less than 15 seconds. Frank called 911 from the store phone, giving a calm, precise report. 2 suspects attempted armed robbery at the Shell station on Highway 36. Both are subdued and require medical attention. No civilians were harmed. The police arrived 7 minutes later, followed by an ambulance and eventually Detective Sarah Chen, a 15-year veteran who'd seen her share of late-night violence. "You did this?" she asked Frank, looking at the 2 suspects. One was conscious, but zip-tied with plastic restraints Frank had found in the back office. The other was still unconscious but breathing steadily. "Yes, ma'am." Detective Chen looked. Around the store, there was a bullet hole in the cigarette display, some scattered merchandise, and a few drops of blood on the floor. But considering what had happened, the scene was remarkably tidy. "How?" she asked. Frank pointed to his forearm, where the tattoo was now fully visible. Training. Detective Chen studied the ink. She'd served in the army herself, did 2 tours in Afghanistan, and she recognized the significance of what she was seeing. "How long were you in? 20 years? Enlisted at 18, retired at 38, and now you're working at a gas station," Frank shrugged. "It's honest work." But Detective Chen could see there was more to the story. "You didn't go from being part of the most elite military unit in the world to working the night shift at a gas station without something happening in between." She didn't ask, though. Some stories weren't meant to be told to strangers. The paramedics checked Frank for injuries and found none. The 2 suspects were treated for minor injuries and taken to the county jail, where they would eventually plead guilty to attempted armed robbery and receive sentences of 5 to 7 years each. By morning, word had gotten out. It started with the police report, which mentioned that a gas station clerk had defended himself against 2 armed robbers. Then someone at the police station mentioned that the clerk was a former Navy SEAL. By noon, the local newspaper was calling the station asking for an interview. Frank declined. He always declined. But Carlos heard about it when he came in for his evening shift. "Is it true?" he asked Frank. "Were you really a SEAL?" "Long time ago," Frank said. "Why didn't you ever say anything?" Frank considered the question. What would be the point? But Carlos could see the change in his coworker. Frank had always carried himself differently than other people, but now Carlos understood why. The perfect posture, the constant awareness of his surroundings, the way he could read people in seconds, it all made sense now. Over the following days, other details emerged. Someone at the VA hospital recognized Frank's name and mentioned that he'd been coming in for treatment for years, never complaining, never asking for special treatment. A neighbor remembered that Frank always kept his small apartment spotless and that he jogged 5 miles every morning before dawn, rain or shine. The picture that emerged was of a man who'd served his country with distinction and then simply faded into civilian life, asking for nothing, bothering no one, but always ready if needed. 3 weeks after the robbery, Detective Chen stopped by the gas station during Frank's shift. She bought a coffee and some gum, making small talk while the store was empty. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. Frank nodded. "What brought you here? I mean, a guy with your background could probably find work anywhere. Security, law enforcement, private contracting. Why here?" Frank was quiet for a long moment, cleaning the already clean counter. "You ever been to Afghanistan? 2 tours? Then you know what it's like? The noise, the chaos, the constant alertness. When I got out, I tried the contractor thing for a while. good money, but it was just more of the same. More violence, more adrenaline, more reasons to stay angry at the world. He paused, looking out at the interstate where a steady stream of headlights flowed past in both directions. This is different, he continued. It's quiet most of the time. People come and go, but they're not trying to hurt anyone. They just want gas, or coffee, or directions. And if something does happen, like what happened 3 weeks ago, I'm still useful. I can still protect people. Detective Chen nodded. She understood. Some veterans thrived on continued action and excitement, others needed peace and simplicity to heal. The people who come in here at night, Frank continued, a lot of them are vulnerable, traveling alone, tired, maybe a little scared. They don't know it, but having someone like me here means they're safer. That matters to me. Even if they never know who you are, especially then. Months passed. The story of the gas station robbery became local legend, embellished with each retelling. Some versions had Frank taking on 5 attackers. Others claimed he'd disarmed them with his bare hands while blindfolded. Frank never corrected the stories, but he never confirmed them either. The truth was simpler and more complex than the legends. Frank Miller had spent 20 years in the most elite military unit in the world, conducting operations that would never appear in history books. He'd saved lives, taken lives, and carried secrets that would die with him. And when his service was done, he'd chosen to continue serving in the quietest way possible, by being a guardian that nobody knew they had. The gas station became a different place after the robbery, though the changes were subtle. Regular customers started nodding to Frank when they came in, showing a respect they'd never shown before. Truckers would sometimes linger to chat, sharing stories of their own military service. Late-night travelers seemed more relaxed, though they might not have been able to explain why. Carlos eventually graduated from community college and moved on to a better job, but not before telling Frank, "I always felt safe working with you. Now I know why." His replacement, a young woman named Maria, was nervous about working alone at night. Frank made a point of being extra vigilant during her shifts, and she quickly came to appreciate his quiet presence. "He doesn't say much," she told her boyfriend, "but there's something about him that makes you feel like nothing bad could happen while he's around." One evening, almost a year after the robbery, a group of teenagers came into the store. They weren't causing trouble, just buying energy drinks and snacks. But they were curious about Frank. One of them, braver than the rest, approached the counter. "Is it true you used to be in the military?" the kid asked. "Yes," Frank said. "Were you in any wars?" Frank looked at the teenager, maybe 17, full of questions about what it meant to be a warrior, probably considering military service himself. "Several," Frank said. "Was it like in the movies?" Frank almost smiled. "No, it wasn't like the movies." The kid waited for more, but Frank didn't elaborate. After a moment, the teenager asked, "Do you miss it?" That was a harder question. Did Frank miss the adrenaline, the brotherhood, the sense of purpose that came with serving something bigger than himself? Did he miss being part of a team that could accomplish impossible missions? Did he miss the respect that came with wearing the uniform? "I miss parts of it," Frank said finally, "but this is good too." The teenager looked around the gas station, the fluorescent lights, the scratched linoleum, the smell of hot dogs that had been rolling for too long. This, Frank confirmed. Someone needs to be here. Someone needs to make sure people are safe when they're traveling at night, when they're vulnerable. It's not glamorous, but it matters. The kid nodded, not entirely understanding, but sensing that there was wisdom in Frank's words. He bought his energy drink and left with his friends, but he would remember the conversation. Years passed, Frank grew older, his hair turned completely gray and his face acquired more lines. But he never missed a shift, never complained about the pay or the hours, never asked for recognition. New employees came and went. Some stayed long enough to earn Frank's respect and learn from his example. Others moved on quickly, never understanding what they were missing. The gas station itself changed hands twice, but the new owners always kept Frank on. He was reliable, customers liked him, and nothing bad ever happened on his watch. They didn't need to know why. Detective Chen, now a lieutenant, still stopped by occasionally. She'd been promoted partly based on her handling of the gas station robbery case, and she never forgot that Frank had made her look good by resolving the situation so cleanly. "Do you ever think about retiring?" she asked him one night. Frank considered the question. He was past 60 now, eligible for Social Security, and his military pension was enough to live on. "Maybe someday," he said, "but not yet. People still need someone to watch over them." And so he continued his vigil, night after night, year after year. The quiet guardian in the fluorescent-lit temple of commerce and convenience, protecting people who would never know his name or understand his sacrifice, because that's what real warriors do. They don't seek glory or recognition. They simply stand watch, ready to act when needed, content in the knowledge that their presence makes the world a little bit safer. Frank Miller, formerly of SEAL Team 6, had found his perfect post. Not in some exotic war zone or high-profile security assignment, but in a gas station on the edge of a small town, where ordinary people doing ordinary things could count on being protected by someone extraordinary. So I ask you now, have you ever encountered someone like Frank? Someone who seemed ordinary on the surface, but carried themselves with quiet dignity and strength. Someone who never boasted about their past, but made you feel safer just by being there. Share their name in the comments, tell us their story. Because here at The Human Stories, we believe that the most powerful heroes are often the ones who never ask to be called heroes. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please share it and subscribe. Help us keep these voices alive and these stories remembered. We'll see you in the next one. And remember, sometimes the most important guardians are the ones you never notice, standing watch in the most unexpected places, ready to act when the moment demands it. This video is a fictional dramatization created for entertainment purposes only. Any resemblance to real individuals, locations, or events is purely coincidental. This story was crafted to highlight themes of service, sacrifice, and quiet heroism through emotional storytelling.